Good morning and welcome to a brand new edition of the Kingdom Driven CEO. Today is Saturday, April the 23rd, and we are so glad you are with us. This is your host, Sean Kouplen, and today we are going to be talking about a concept called Imposter Syndrome. Now, you may have heard of this before. It basically refers to an internal experience of believing that you're not as competent as other people perceive you to be. This is typically narrowly applied to intelligence and achievement, but it can have links to perfectionism and a social context as well. And it basically means that you just kind of feel like a fraud. You know, I think a lot of us struggle with this from time to time, and I want to talk through kind of what it is, how to cope with it, and what God says about you and I. So there are several types of imposter syndrome. The first one is the superhero. We overwork ourselves to make up for how inadequate we feel. There is the natural genius. We set exceedingly high goals and feel crushed when we don't achieve them. There is the expert that is never satisfied with our level of understanding, always trying to learn more. There is the perfectionist that's never completely happy with our work, fixated on flaws instead of strength. And there is the soloist who prefers to work alone and won't ask for help because we don't want to look like we are incompetent. So this term was first used by psychologists Susanna Imes and Pauline Rose Clancy in the 1970s. And when it was introduced, it was really thought to apply to most high-achieving women. And it was because they were struggling with the roles of trying to be a mother and a wife, and they didn't feel like they were doing a very good job of either of these. But now we know that this is much more widely experienced, and about 70% of us experience imposter syndrome. There are several characteristics and signs of imposter syndrome, and they include an inability to realistically assess our competence and skills, attributing our success to external factors. We're really not that good. It's the market or something else made us successful. Berating our own performance, fear that we won't live up to expectations, overachieving, sabotaging our own success, having self-doubt, and setting very challenging goals and feeling disappointed when we fall short. Well, for some people, this imposter syndrome can fuel feelings of motivation to achieve. It usually comes at a cost in the form of constant anxiety. We might over-prepare or work much harder than necessary to make sure that nobody finds out that we are a fraud. It sets up a vicious cycle in which we think that the only reason we survived, and were successful was because we stayed up all night rehearsing. Or, the only way we got through this party was because we memorized details about the guests. Or, and so it just makes us constantly overwork, over-prepare all the time. And the problem is the more we accomplish, the more we feel like a fraud. It's as though we can't internalize our experiences of success. And I can tell you that I had an experience like this early in my life. I was really over-promoted in the banking business, and I was always petrified that my bosses were going to realize that I wasn't as smart as they thought I was. So I was always working, always scared, always looking for constant reinforcement. And when I didn't get it, I was afraid that they didn't appreciate me. It is really a very, very difficult place to be. To identify imposter syndrome, let me give you a few ideas to see if this might be impacting you. If you agonize over even the smallest mistakes or flaws in our work, if we attribute our success to luck or other outside factors, if we're very sensitive to even the most constructive of criticism, if we feel like we will inevitably be found out as a phony, as I just mentioned to you, if we downplay our own expertise, even in areas where we are genuinely more skilled than others, those are all signs that we have imposter syndrome. Now, there are a lot of causes of this. One might be family upbringing, parenting styles. If you have a parent that was either very, very controlling or overprotective, that can add to this. If you have one that was very, very critical with high levels of conflict and low levels of support, that can attribute to this. If we are entering a new role, that can trigger imposter syndrome, either new work or new school or a completely new role. Certain personality traits have been linked to a higher risk of imposter syndrome, low self-efficacy, perfectionism, neuroticism will tend to lean itself toward this way. If you have social anxiety, that will also tend to push you toward having this type of imposter syndrome. So the question is, how do we cope with it? And I want to give you some thoughts here, and I want to close with a spiritual answer and sharing with you, because this was very, very real in my life. So first, to get past imposter syndrome, we've got to start asking ourselves some really important and difficult questions, such as, what core beliefs do I hold about myself? Who do I believe that I am? Do I believe that I am worthy of love as I am? Do I have to be perfect for others to approve of me? And to move back past these feelings, we've got to become comfortable confronting some of the deeply held beliefs that we have about ourselves. Here are some techniques we can use. One, share our feelings. Find a confidant that we can tell somebody how we are feeling and let them visit with us. I have a number of friends who struggle with this, and I can see it. And so when I talk to them and tell them the truth, a lot of times it will help them to move out of this mindset. Number two, focusing on others. The more we focus on others, this has been a real key for me. The less I focus on myself, the less I struggle with this type of imposter syndrome. Helping others, seeing how we can help others, supporting them will help us to get past this. Take baby steps. Realize that we don't have to do everything perfectly. Realize that we can open up and be vulnerable, and honestly, people will prefer that. They like people who are honest and open, not people that think they have everything figured out. Take a moment and question our thoughts. When we go down this path, step back and question our thoughts and say, okay, Sean, you're doing it again. Remember, that God loves me just the way that I am. Remember that others love me just the way that I am. Stop comparing. That's a big one. Stop looking at others and comparing, because they may have the same problem that you have. Use social media moderately. Man, this is a big one, because we all know that we only put our best out on social media. So you can't let yourself believe that those things are real. That's not everybody's whole life. Stop fighting our feelings. Don't fight the feelings of not belonging. Try to lean into them and accept them. It's only when we acknowledge them that we can start to unravel these core beliefs that are holding us back. And finally, just refuse to let it hold us back. No matter how much we feel like we may not belong, don't let that stop you from pursuing your goals. Keep going and refuse to be stopped. Now, let me close by giving you a very personal story about this today. So, as I mentioned earlier, I struggled with this for years. Honestly, until I was 34 years old, I was petrified that people were going to realize that I didn't know as much as they thought I did. And frankly, every time I would get a promotion, it would get worse. You would think it would get better, but it would just get worse and worse. And so I lived with this constant feeling of insecurity until we had an amazing experience with the bank. In 2009, it looked like we were not going to survive. And I've shared this story before, so forgive me if you've heard it. But basically, I'm going to belabor telling you all of the details, but in essence, we had a miracle. We were about to go under. All of my worst fears were coming true. I was going to be the failure that I was always afraid of being, and the Lord really delivered us through a $3 million capital injection that nobody to this day can explain to me how we got it. It was through a Treasury Department program called the Capital Purchase Program that we definitely did not qualify for, but we got the funds anyway. In that moment, what I learned was two things. Number one, God really loves me. He really saved me. It mattered to him that I was okay, and our employees were okay, and our shareholders were okay. That was critically important to me. And number two, I learned that all I can do was my best. Okay? That is all. I cannot, I don't have all the answers. There are things that I'm not going to be able to figure out no matter how hard I work. So all I can do each day is my very best. And when I do that, the rest, I just have to trust in God. My friend Gordon Greer really taught me this. He told me about how back in the 1980s, he had a very, very difficult work environment, and he learned that all he could do was he would look in this mirror as he walked out of his walked out into his garage, and he would ask himself, Gordon, are you going to do your best today? And he said he would say yes, and he would go to work and he would do his best. He would come back home and he would look in the mirror and say, Gordon, did you do your best today? And he learned that he couldn't control a lot of things he couldn't control. How other people treated him, interest rates, oil prices, how his clients did. There were just a lot of things, but he could control doing his very best. So it is very important that you know that, and it reads Psalm 139, and it will explain fully that God created you just the way you are. He knows the number of hairs on your head. He knows the thoughts before you have them, the words before you speak them. He loves you. So I encourage you to accept that and realize that all he wants is our best. He doesn't want perfection. He's not asking you to be the best at everything that you do. He's just asking you to do his best and follow him one day at a time. And in that way, you are absolutely not an imposter. You are a son or a daughter of the King of the universe who loves you more than you can ever imagine. So I hope you enjoyed this. I hope it was as meaningful to you as it was to me. Thank you for joining the Kingdom Driven CEO, and I will talk to you next week.